Welcome, CFA Level 1 Ecos. I'm going to try do my best to do this module justice. I'm going to start out by throwing this module under the bus. I'll give a tiny bit of an intro to myself, not that that's relevant. What's relevant is mastering the module. I'll also set your expectations for the exam, which hopefully you're well aware of. This is your last hurdle besides some sort of mock tests and revisions. At this stage, I hope you know this inside out, backwards and forwards, and where exactly your mark allocations are going to be. But if not, I'll set the context as I mentioned. I'm this lowly person at the bottom of the pile here. I'd like to say that I compete, but there's top caliber over here. My name's Rob. I'm responsible for research at an asset management company, and we also run a small venture capital company as well. Confession time. I've studied a bit. I did my investment management masters at UJ's business school. I did most things with the CFP, CRPM, and here's my confession. I am a CFA student as well. For my sins, I am in level 3. So let's see if I can try and guide you through this path that I've been down myself. Why Eco specifically tonight? Well, and Portman, but I'm sorry I couldn't assist you with this semester. Ecos, I've been assisting both UJ and UNISA with economics for a while. I also assist with some other stuff at honors level for UJ. But I use economics and portfolio management on a day-to-day basis in our practice. And here's the kicker. You would have probably heard or seen or worked out for yourself that Ecos is not necessarily the best bang for buck. And if you can probably work out that marginal cost for yourself, then you may pass this module. Ecos is approximately 10% as you make your way through the levels, but what you'll find is that we've got a massive amount of readings, all the way from 14 to 20. There's something ridiculous like 160 or 70 learning outcome statements. I counted, but I've forgotten. I'm not as good as Russell that way. What we're going to do is we're going to try cover this in 3 lectures. First lecture tonight is going to be reading 14 and 15. The reason for this is because by the time we get into the nitty-gritty of each of the lectures, the common feedback is, I wish I'd done this sooner. Now, please don't get lost in all of this, because what happens is that the level to which I will show you that you need to master this is going to be what you're going to need in your exam, but you do need to be aware that the bang for buck in terms of the amount of learning outcome statements we cover is not, the juice is not worth the squeeze to spend all your time here. Okay, obviously it's due reward, and if Paul or Kurvis tell you that their subjects are the best, they're talking nonsense. But anyways, let's see if we can try and do this subject some justice. So, hands up quickly just so I know where to pitch. Who here has done Ecos, second, third, fourth year Ecos? Ecos? Are the rest of you accountants by any chance? First year Ecos, accountants. We're not going to be friends, eh? I don't know what it is, why you sit there and we sit here, and to bridge the gap in between is a hard thing, but let's see if we can try and do it. Learning outcome statements for tonight, topics in demand and supply analysis. Good news is there used to be an extra reading that got condensed into this about 2 years ago. Well, 2 years ago. The bad news is now there's all this prerequisite knowledge that you're supposed to have. So if you're feeling a bit rough around the edges, let's have a coffee, or YouTube is your friend. Okay, you can pretty much do an economics degree via YouTube these days. So what are we going to look at? We're going to have a look at some elasticities. This is a bit of a sore topic. Have you guys had any lectures by Mo yet? Okay. So there's some elasticity principle that we're busy working on at the moment, because the calculus and the algebra of it, I can't find the right solution, neither can the actuary, so we're going to find some big guns somewhere. But what do you do when you get to that point? Just do what's in the CFA notes, and there we go. Okay. So we're going to have a look at some elasticities. We're going to see how us as consumers have our demand habits affected when certain variables change. We're going to have a look at different types of good, as well as this important concept called marginal returns, and specifically marginal changes. That's a little bit of differentiation, a little bit of calculus, no major maths tonight. The big one is the elasticities. Very important, we're going to have a look at these different costing structures and how they affect operations versus shutdowns. So if you've done management accounting, you're going to cruise through that section, no problem. Okay, management accounting costing is probably the stupidest thing I've ever come across in my life. And then economies and diseconomies of scale. So quite interesting, and this is what annoys me. Everybody slates economics, but wait until you get to equities in level 2. Wait until you get to asset management in level 3. Who's the shining stars in those sections? Ecos. So, let's begin. A little bit of an introduction to economics, and please, if we finish at 8:30, we finish then. If we finish at 10, we finish then. I'm not we'll eat. I've been on your side of the table. I know we get hungry, except for the foresight in the classroom. But we'll keep it going at a fair level. A little bit of introduction to economics. We have a look at essentially the planning, the consumption and the distribution of goods and services within an economy. Okay, you're not going to get a question that's as simple as that, but hey, that frames it. That's a misnomer in terms of economics goes beyond just goods. And that's why people give it discredit. They discredit it when we're in the finance game. Because unless you're actually at a manufacturing facility, you see how you lack the link to see how you can apply this in a day-to-day purpose or context. There's two different types of things. There's macroeconomics, and this is where we study the big picture, aspects in aggregate. I think that has a greater application for what we may do in this class, and I'm making an assumption. Please excuse me. That's the type of variables that you see people say may move the stock market, or the currency, or there's geopolitical considerations, or there's GDP numbers. Okay. But we can't also forget about microeconomics, which is the study of individuals and business units without the interlinkages between the rest of the economy and aggregate behind it. So we're going to have a fine balance between both of them, but primarily the emphasis is going to be on microeconomics for tonight's discussion. Okay. And we're going to start with some demand analysis of the consumer. And I usually like to make it more interactive and stuff, but if I stand here highlighting for you, I think I'm going to have a hunchback by the end of the night. So let's just talk about this. Demand analysis of the consumer, every single one of us in this room. These principles, economics is like the Braai conversation of the investment industry. Everybody knows about it, but nobody does it. Okay. Everybody can talk about the thing, but nobody does the thing. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about elasticity. Very important. If you're in fund management, we're going to talk about fees. How expensive should you set up your product, and what flows can you expect at the margin, whether that's high or low? It's very important. You can't run your business without it. Okay. Substitution and income effects, normal and inferior goods. But we're going to start off with the basic. And economists love to have laws, even though this is not a real science. And the first law that everybody knows, so I'm not going to harp on it, is if something is more expensive, do you buy more or less? Okay, so the seats aren't full in the Edge classroom, so what does that tell you about price? Easy. I've got to afford my food somehow. I'm joking. Okay. We know that if the price of these lectures dropped, what would happen to the number of bums and seats? It would increase. So I'm not going to spend any time there. I just want you to start to get familiar with this function. This function is going to be a slight little bit of cause for confusion later on in life. And this demand function is essentially going to be the bane of your existence if you get a question from this section. I will be very much willing to bet a cup of coffee or a juice or a beer or something for every single person in this room if they don't ask this in a paper in one way or another for yourself. Okay. What happens over here is that how you read this is you say that this function that you read, quantity demanded in terms of own good X, is a function of the price of the own good itself, of your particular income, and the price of alternative goods, PY, which could be complements or substitutes. Now there's going to be a whole little dance that you're going to do with this function to determine quantity demanded, to determine elasticity, and therefore to assess how sensitive something is to you changing the price. but we'll get to that in good time. As long as you know that these things, amongst others, also create the demand and supply dynamics for a particular good. Okay. So, here's a particular hypothetical example that we're going to work through together. What you'll see is that the quantity demanded of whatever this good is, it's T, but you can substitute whatever you want in here, says that there's this constant term, that's 90 over here. However, you're going to make adjustments to this 90. So the first thing that I want you to be able to recognize when you work with this in your own capacity is why some of the signs are positive or negative. Now, if I attach a negative number next to a constant, and I increase that negative, what happens to the constant? Goes down, right? Okay. So what you need to understand is that that minus 5.5px is the price of the good itself and the coefficient that's attached to it. Okay? So if my price is 1 rand, I can shave off 5.5 units for people's purchases. If the price is 2 rand, I can shave off 11. And you repeat this exercise linearly until you've got nothing left. Okay. So, we're going to learn something, and I want you to make a note in your books right now, that 5.5 is not elasticity. Just make a note right there, we'll come back to it later. Elasticity, as an economist, as a financial director, as a product manager, you want to know, if I change my price by a certain amount, how much will my revenue or my sales change as a percentage? Okay, that is not a unitless measure. It's attached to the number of units next to it. Now, how do we carry on reading through this? You see that there's a positive 0.3 I. Okay, what does I stand for? I stands for income. Now, if your income goes up, are you more likely to purchase more goods and services? Maybe. Okay? What's the strength of the relationship? I don't know. Hire an economist to tell you. But what that says there is that little coefficient says, for this particular good, the higher your income, the more you buy. Okay. Once again, if you got to a question that asked you for the income elasticity of demand, you can bet your bottom dollar one of the answers is going to be that number, 0.3. Okay. Do not make this mistake. I'm warning you as the lecture begins. And the last one is the price of alternative goods and services. And we're going to think. I'm throwing you right into the deep end off the bat, and I apologize, but we're going to think through this. We've done an example where the sign is minus as well as positive. Now we've got another good right at the end of this little function where that sign is minus. So as this price of this other good, whatever it may be, goes up, you demand less of this particular good. Okay. There's two things in this world. Goods that we buy together as one bundle, and goods that we buy differently. Coffee, tea, for example. Okay. You can't consume coffee and tea together, but you can consume tea and milk together. Well, tea bags and milk. Okay. So I want you to just take a moment to think, throw an answer to me. If that number is minus, what do you think is going on here? Is it a good that's consumed together or separately? Okay. Why do you say separately? Oh, thanks, Anana. So, think about this. If the price of that separate good goes up, now what happens is coffee is twice as expensive compared to tea as it used to be. Do you think we're going to buy more tea or less tea? More tea. More tea. On a relative basis, it's now cheaper. And if you understand this concept, you understand the substitution effect, and we can save ourselves about 4 paragraphs. So the way I want you to think of this in your mind, I'm showing you these little tricks. I'm not going to bore you with going through all the painstaking detail. You'll get the exam technique. You'll know how to work the system, I guarantee it to you. But in your mind, I want you to think like this. If the two goods can be bought together, I want you to, in your mind, to combine their prices and then see if the price of the combined basket goes up or down. Voila, you've got it in your mind and it's easy to understand. So this is the sort of detail and level I expect from you. Are you going to learn this in class? Not a chance in a million years. How do I know that? One, I've been behind your side of the table. What it requires is a massive amount of hours, and you need to go to the back of the sections, do it by yourself and get it wrong, and then let me tell you, you get it right after that. Okay. So This example will continue to work through what happens, how you substitute these goods into the function. But let me just show you this. If you're given P of X in brackets over here at $2 per box, can I safely assume that everyone in this room can find where to insert that into the function above? Okay, how do you do it? You take the $2 next to the 5.5, you multiply them together and you minus 11. You got it? You're laughing, but no. Don't just give it time. Give it time. Okay. Now, what do we do as economists? We say something ceteris paribus or ceteris paribus or, oh my goodness, if we get into a pronunciation argument tonight, I'm going to start calling you by all your names with funny accents or something. So just let the sleeping dog lie and I'll pronounce it how I do. But ceteris paribus says that if we hold everything else constant and we change one thing, what is that effect? And that is our goal tonight for elasticities. We need to populate this whole function to get two things. Your coefficient standing by itself, or whatever it is, your own price, your income, or the alternative good, whether it be a complement or a substitute, as well as that magical number of 54 for the quantity demanded. I want you somehow in your mind to please just make a little note next to that 54, the quantity demanded. Say, Rob mentioned that we need to solve for this fully before we get to our next steps. It's quite important to all of what we're going to get through. So, I want to talk for a moment about the ceteris paribus. Everything else held constant. Why do we do this? As I mentioned, to change one variable at a time, and you'll see function 3 over here, something magical's happened. Going from the functions that we've given you above to now function 3, there's 65 minus 5.5px. What have we done? What we've done is we've plugged in the variables that have been given to us, okay, our exogenous variables that have come from outside the model, okay, this little function thingy, and we've kept them constant. We've lumped them into this fixed term over here, 65. So they haven't disappeared. They've just lumped into that number. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, how did I know that I want P of X as an unknown? Why wasn't it I? Why wasn't it Py? The question will guide you to what it wants. Now, what you need to do first and foremost is that, ladies and gents, you need to get P of X whenever you want to graph any sort of demand function, because we use the inverse demand function for that. And if you want to assess some sort of coefficient for the price elasticity, which we'll get to in a second. So, I want you to clearly note one more thing for me, please, that so far our demand function has QD of X on the left-hand side. Happy with that? Then we move on. Just down below, we've got a function over here that says price is equal to. Ladies and gents, just a little bit of algebraic manipulation over here says we get the P of X by itself on the left-hand side, so now we can solve for what the price is for a given quantity that's provided to us. It's this over here that you see, this bottom function 4, where we're essentially going to use to graph what we see later on. So I want you to clearly know the difference between it so that we can work with what we've been given. Okay. And as I mentioned to you, that's the inverse demand function. Okay. So what you see over here is the following. When you look at what economists or econometricians or any statistician says about a dependent and an independent variable, you guys have done quants, you know that X is your independent variable. Okay? Where does your independent variable go? Along the x-axis, okay, and the y-axis and so forth. And that can be used as a mechanism to help guide in terms of why this inverse demand function is the one that we graph. Okay, why are we doing this? Because we want to know what the price is and how sensitive that is to other relationships. So, What you very need to quickly also see over here is that this demand curve, inverse demand curve, apologies, is negatively sloped. It's downward sloping. So, very simply, as the price of this particular good increases, the quantity demanded of this good decreases. Okay. Now, what other names can we call this that you may or may not see in questions? There may be a marginal value curve. Why would that be the case? Because what that line shows is the highest price that consumers are willing to pay for a good and service at given quantities. Do you see how that price decreases as quantity increases? Yes. So think about this just for 1 second. I'm not sure if everybody here likes fast food or takeaways or anything of the sort, but let me ask you, and apologies, I don't know your name. How much did you pay for that burger? Wow. Okay, that's why I go for the hot pot there. Good value for money, but I'm a miser. Okay. $57 for that meal with chips. How much would you pay for the next one? Are you very hungry? So I'd probably have to say maybe $40 for another burger, maybe 30. You go for it at 20. Okay. That's what we're looking at over here. The marginal benefit that you get from consuming each unit of good decreases, and that's why we also call this the marginal value curve. Now, it doesn't matter which way they ask it. Couldn't give a continental, but they're going to ask it in one way or another. So I'm just giving you these cheat sheets as we move through the notes. But here is where the magic trick starts to come in. This is where we use a little bit of calculus, or economists just call it differentiation. And for the actuaries or the mathematicians in the room, if I say something wrong as well, please don't kill me. Okay. If I can get the highlight to work, then. Okay. So this is the key concept that I want you to start looking at here. That triangle is called delta. That is essentially the same thing that you see if you differentiate something. There's those funny little squiggly D's next to thing, and they look complicated in the numerator and the denominator. That's essentially calculus, okay? But why are we starting to talk about this here? Because what we need to see as economists is essentially how sensitive something is to a small change in price, okay? And intuitively, before we carry on, I'm going to draw another line for you over here. Now, I want you to look at these two black lines that I've added here, and I want you to just try and start feeling out graphs, because that's what economists need to do. If I tell you that the middle line that I've drawn next to the arrow pointing up towards the top left versus the nearly vertical line that I drew in the far right, as you move down in price, which one of those lines do you think is going to have the most movement along the x-axis? Probably the original line that was there to begin with, right? Okay. So if you can recognize that, you're starting to feel out elasticities for what we're building into here. And this begins to matter, because let's call a spade a spade. The purpose of this entire section, for the most part, is to get you to complete an elasticity calculation. Okay. So we want to measure the slope or the rate of change. Now, everybody here did basic maths on some level. That slope of the line is constant along the line. Is that correct? It's a certain gradient, m, y equals ms plus c. It's the same thing. Okay? But there's a little party trick when it comes to this question. The party trick is that the elasticity is not the same all the way along the line. So let's work our way through this and try and build up to it. So, we want to measure how sensitive quantity demanded or quantity supplied is relative to the variables that affect them. Okay? Economists will call this elasticity of demand or elasticity of supply. It's similar to the concept of credit duration or modified duration in your fixed income modules. Similar kind of concept. Same problem exists. What happens if it's a convex or a concave function? What happens if there's two different points of depending on the direction? Same nonsense, different story. Okay. So, what we're going to have a look at here is this original friendly function that we saw on the previous page. Remember? Our other terms which we held constant are lumped into that 65, and therefore we say ceteris paribus. Holding everything else constant, what would the relative change be in the demand given the own price of this good moving up or down? That's what we're going to eventually work to. So what you can see over here is that the coefficient of the price variable is at minus 5.5. And ladies and gents, I promise you, please, if you want me to stop and pause on a concept, please just say so. If you want to talk to me in the break, if that's what you prefer, please say so. I know what you're thinking. I know what my fellow classmates have said. You know, sometimes you just want it to speed up or slow down. If you want me to speed up, throw something at me. Actually, one time a buddy in the class actually did, long story, but he actually picked me. But anyways, so we're going to get onto this concept over here, this metric called elasticity. And please just do me a favor. Elasticity is a gauge of sensitivity that is not dependent on the particular units of measure. I.e., why do we work with standard deviation and not variance? Because standard deviation can be applied to any number, whether that number is a billion or 1 rand. Okay, you still see how far it moves away from it, and elasticity serves the same purpose for us. You may see one question come up with a theoretical thing like that, but for the past couple of years, I haven't seen too many come up like that, so you should be fine. This is where the stuff lies. Okay. Elasticity is a general measure of how sensitive one variable is to another variable. How we work this out over here, don't worry about that. Focus on this for me, please. What this says, ladies and gents, is the following. We read this by saying it's the percentage change in the quantity demanded of a particular good divided by the percentage change in the price of that good itself. How can this change? This can change. Don't you have a file? With the notes, don't you have a file? Oh, all the good stuff. Okay. So, the P of X can change. But what I want you to know, first of all, is take a mental note or write it down. That when you look at the elasticity, the denominator doesn't change. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to manipulate this algebraically slightly below so that we can work with variables that we've been given. And this is a shortcut to the whole textbook. If you try and read the CFA notes yourself, you'll be here for days and days. That's what I want us to focus on. What this says is that the elasticity of demand for a good is a function of the change in the quantity demanded of that good divided by the change in price. I think that's something that we recognize from something that we've seen before. If I had to give it to you and say that that term over there was the coefficient, would you be able to point it out to me in that particular function? There's only one coefficient that's next to a variable term, and that's the minus 5.5. Okay, so I want you to take something that looks complicated on face value and just make it simple. Then the next part over here, this is this ratio that I referred to. And I want to just take you back just a little bit so that you can understand what I mean. There is price here and quantity here. What is a ratio? Just one good relative to another. So what you'll see is that when I say price to quantity, all it means is for a given input that you get, and the question will give this to you. You just select a point on a particular function, okay? And you say 3 divided by 48.5, and that's the relative price ratio, and Bob's your uncle. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but cool. Now, I want to just start to show you something over here. We all agreed that the coefficient, the slope of that line stays the same across the entire line, right? Okay, if it's -2, it's -2, the line slopes. If it's +2, it angles like this. It doesn't matter. Okay. And if you don't know that, just trust me that that's the case. But I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see the following. If I take that point over there next to the blue dot, and I say 2 divided by 54, do you think the ratio is going to be the same as 3 divided by 48.5? Probably not. Okay, but I'm cheating. I've seen this before. So if you wanted to look yourself, just go do the quick arithmetic. Okay, I can't do that in my head, but probably Mo can, and that's fine. But the point is, ladies and gents, what I want you to notice, because we roll onto this very quickly, is that this magical little concept of elasticity of demand varies depending on where you are on this particular function. And we'll get into that in a second, but cheat sheet again, as long as you work out the quantity first, and you take the relevant coefficient that's given to you, you'd be able to solve any elasticity question. Happy? Happy until we try our first question? Okay. Okay. So, the last statement. If you take your relevant coefficient, and by relevant, what on earth do I mean? I mean, you've got 3 different types of elasticities that a standard question can ask you. Okay, there is more, but not in CFA level of economics. You've got the price of your own good, and there's the coefficient next to it. You've got your income, and there's your coefficient next to it. And you've got the price of an alternative good, which could be a complement or a substitute. The coefficient's next to it. You take whichever coefficient the question wants you to, and you divide it by the ratio of whatever the answer is from solving for that coefficient to the quantity demanded. So remember I told you that 54 was going to be a magical number? That 54 is the denominator that makes an appearance again and again and again. Let's move on to an example, and hopefully it helps cement the idea. Okay. So, step number 1. What you do, as I've mentioned, is you solve for quantity demanded by putting all the variables in. Okay, every single variable that you've been given, pop it into that function, you're good to go. Step number 2. Find where your coefficient is relative to what elasticity you need to solve. Price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, and the likes. Okay. The third one is you then take, in this example, you take the ratio of the price to the quantity demanded, 54, and you multiply that by the coefficient, and now you have this wonderful elasticity that we've been talking about. Okay. So, what happens over here, ladies and gents, is that you get this little naughty number called 0.2. And I know some of you don't look too happy, but let's give you an example. If I had to ask you to wear your business owner hat right now, and I came in, I was a consultant from McKinsey, because that's where the good people are, and I said to you, you sell this beautiful product. Let's go cliched and say tables. And I say your price elasticity of demand is 0.2%. You say, what the crap does that mean? I say to you, if you increase your price by 1 percentage point, I can tell you with a high degree of confidence that chances are you're going to sell 0.2% less of these tables. Okay, everyone happy with that? You're going to probably ask yourself, is it worthwhile to do that? And that's what we're going to move on to next, to see how that moves where you are depending on the cost structure of your business. So, will you know this by the end of tonight? Maybe if you're lucky, but I don't think so until you do it yourself. Please, humor me and try it yourself. People have spent a lot of time putting the questions in the back of your book, but what I recommend is you do the CFA questions from the book itself as well. Even if it's all nonsense in any event, it just gives you comfort that you've seen more questions from the CFA. Okay. So, I want to talk about this little concept at the bottom. We've got these 3 concepts, ladies and gents. We've got unitary elasticity, we've got very elastic, and we've got inelastic goods and services. Now, what we need to do in this module is you may get a question that says, should we change the price of a particular good or service? And you need to know how to adapt each of these three to that particular question. So, we look at this particular demand curve over here, and we know that the law of demand should hold, hence it's downward sloping, but there's some weird things I'll throw at you later. And on this particular curve, what you'll see over here is that slope of that line is the same across that entire line. How do we know that? Because it touches this Cartesian, well, not Cartesian plane, but this coordinate plane at two particular points, and it doesn't matter, it stays static. But like I told you earlier, as you move along the x-axis, and as you move along the y-axis, that ratio changes. What on earth does it mean? Let's talk about it. If you're directly in the middle of this line, you're at what's called the unitary elasticity point, and I'm going to tell you that your price elasticity of demand is 1. You're going to say, thanks, what the crap does that mean? I'm going to say to you, if you increase your price by 1 percentage point, your quantity demanded is going to decrease by 1 percentage point. Okay, so what should I do? Well, what matters to a business? Total revenue and profit. We'll work on to that later. Okay. Now, let's go on to the upper half of this particular section. This is essentially, we've said, elastic demand above the midpoint. What does that mean? Anywhere above this section over here, to the left of the unitary elasticity point, says that your elasticity is greater than 1. So, what happens? Your elasticity here, price elasticity of demand, is 2. So, hit me with the good stuff. I say, I'm going to change my price by 1 percentage point, I'm going to decrease it. What's the change in my quantity demanded? 2%. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Probably. We will assess that in a minute. And over here, ladies and gents, in the bottom half, the right-hand side of the curve, is the inelastic section. This is where things like petrol will sit, where things like energy consumption, certain types of pharmaceuticals for patients that require it. What's that word called where you have to take it the whole time? It's chronic. Thank you very much. Okay. That type of product. So we're going to make our way through this. There's just one last thing that I want you to remember. Just like when we talk about modified duration with bonds, we're talking about small changes, right? Okay. That's because there's a convex relationship there. Okay, there's a nonlinear relationship there. However, this line is dead straight. Why do we still talk about small changes over here? Because the price to quantity ratio changes by a large degree if you make big movements. So once again, we talk about small changes. Economists have this stupid little thing called arc elasticity, because your elasticity depends on which direction you move from, price increasing or price decreasing. You have two elasticities. That's nonsense. Okay. If not for today, I hope that you can just work your way around these curves and these graphs for the most part, right? Okay. We're going to talk about two extremes. Who wants to have a crack at trying to just very simply talk me through this? Don't say the technical word of what it is, just talk me through this. Yes? Previous graph.
Instead of price, it was a percentage change in price or something, then you would see that context.
If you drew a price to quantity ratio for every different point along the curve, I actually have no idea what the shape looks like. But I can tell you that it's not going to be linear. I have no idea what the shape looks like though. I don't think that there's a mathematical principle that governs it. Because you get weird shaped curves and utility functions and nonsense like that. But if you want to try it as an experiment, do it. Say 12 Rand price and 400 quantity, 11 Rand price and 370. I actually can't tell you the answer, sorry. Okay. Let's talk about these outliers in terms of what these graphs do in the real world. Technically, these graphs are not here in the real world, but who wants to talk me through panel A? One taker, come on. Yes. Exactly. The quantity is anchored to a particular point on the x-axis, so you, as the supplier of this particular good, essentially have free reign to ramp up the price as much as you want. In reality, this doesn't exist, but like I said, pharmaceutical companies, somebody that's suffering from diabetes, this is a typical example. Okay, you get, who is it that does diabetes medicine? Novo Nordisk. Novo Nordisk, sometimes their product behaves like the panel A. Panel B is what we call an infinite elasticity curve. Okay, this is the opposite end of the extreme. This is where we're going to start out our next section, market structures, with essentially perfect competition. What this says, ladies and gents, is the following. At a particular price, you can sell as much goods as an individual firm that you want, all the way out to infinity, technically. Okay. Now, what you need to know is that if you marginally increase your price above that point, what you sell will go to zero, because your goods are fungible, they're exactly swappable, they're homogeneous, they're the same, people can get them at the very next shop. And if you drop your price just below the line, you can still sell until infinity, but then you're certifiably insane because you're purposefully giving away profit. Are we studying CFA for love and charity? Maybe some of us are, but not the most. Yeah. So, just so you know, there is not really anything like that, but I want you to know the following. The perfectly elastic line, the one on the right, panel B, is the more important one of the two, because that ties to something that we actually need to learn. And you will see a repetition of this. So, ladies and gents, I just want you to work through this with me now. We'll go at a little bit of a pace and we'll catch it again just now. Own price elasticity of demand, which is not one of those extremes, is affected by a couple of things. Like I said, this is the bright topic of finance. Everybody could work through this and we can know. Okay. How likely are you to pay more for a particular good if there's something else exactly like it supplied by their competitor? Not really. Something's probably going to be more sensitive to changes in price there. How much as a percentage of your total budget does it cost? Well, if Superdome said they were going to double the price of these, whatever that price is, chances are I don't spend 20 or 30% of my income on this. However, my house and my car is a different story. The greater the percentage of your total budget, the more sensitive it is to particular changes. I think the only one here that is a little bit confusing is the one that says it has a longer adjustment time. And this is where you can think of cyclicals. Okay, companies, SA is rife with these things right now. You guys have done equities, right? Does the Molodowsky effect ring a bell, or is that not in your... It rings a bell, okay. That rings a bell. It's going to be, as long as you remember on the day, that's fine. That's where we're talking about here as economists. Essentially what we're saying is cyclical companies will go through this trough in earnings because us as consumers can delay a particular purchase. The life cycle of a fridge is, particularly long. Sometimes you walk into somebody's house and that fridge has been there for longer than the parents have been alive, and you go, nice fridge, can I? Okay. What happens is, the longer the lifetime, the more you can put out the purchase and wait for a time that's appropriate to you, and that's the only confusing one. But you do need to know what makes something more sensitive relative to something else. Put a little star or something there. That's definitely worth talking about it. But here's the crux. The greater or lesser sensitivity comes down to the relationship that we have in this particular graph. And I'm not going too fast, am I? Fine? Fine? Okay. I do like that side of the room. Fine? Okay, I'm not forgetting. Now, what you see over here, ladies and gents, is the following. The top line, let me highlight it for you instead of pointing to the wall randomly. We recognize that function. We've seen that function before, many a times. We know that there's a law of demand attached to the function. We know that there's various elasticities attached to the function. What we don't know is how that translates into total revenue or total expenditure. Doesn't matter, because remember, if I'm the business, my total revenue is what you spend. So don't get confused by all these words flying around. But what you want to see is the following, ladies and gents, and if you can understand this, you've done well. Okay, not complicated though. You see on the left-hand side, as this bottom graph starts to begin to increase. Okay. What you see is that increases to a certain point, which is the dotted line that's associated with unitary elasticity. That tells us that if I'm a business and my product is elastic, and I drop the price, the total expenditure on my good, and i.e. therefore my total revenue, is going to increase. Okay. So, as a business owner with a very elastic good, what's one way to quickly pick up the revenue of your business? It's to drop the price. Okay. But we'll see just now, that doesn't hold true in different market structures. And then we're going to go over, what's it? A Beautiful Mind, I think the movie is. We're going to do some of that maths as well. Nobody thinks it's beautiful then, I promise you. Okay. Now, let's go to the flip side, where it's very close to being infinitely elastic as far as we thought it to be. If we, at that point where my red dot is there, then begin to increase the price, what do you see is going to happen to total expenditure? It's essentially not going to be at its maximum point. So ladies and gents, what you need to know is that for the most part, there will be other rules, as there's always an exception to the rule. Your total expenditure or revenue will be highest where? At the point of unitary elasticity. Okay. How do you figure out where that is in reality? I don't know. If you figure it out, come tell me. Okay. So, I skipped over something that's worth talking about. We may or may not need to calculate certain things when we deal with microeconomics. One of the things is the area of a shape. And as long as you know length times breadth for a rectangle, or half base times height for a triangle, you can basically work out anything, and nothing they throw at you will derail you. So what you need to do, ladies and gents, is I say, which is more profitable for you? Dot higher or dot lower? Okay, we know by looking at this graph that dot lower is further up along the total expenditure function than the lower one is. But how do we now prove that by actual calculations? What we do is we say length times breadth there, length times breadth there, and what you'll see is the latter has a greater area. And you're cool. Okay. We will circle back to that later, don't worry. But phew. Everyone's, but yeah, okay. Now, ladies and gents, income elasticity of demand, cross price elasticity of demand, and then the alternatives, depending what it is, substitute or the other one that I forgot, hit a complete blank. But I'm not going to work through each one with you. I trust that you can do that yourself. Let's rather do this. If you have a problem with actually working it out and getting the right answer, I've got TeamViewer, Skype. I work just down the road here. I live in Four-Way Side, so we can meet up for a coffee, work through it. No problems at all. But let's just get through this, because I think you'll appreciate it. What you'll see here, ladies and gents, is that the various different types of elasticities have various coefficients applied to them, as I've mentioned. But, like I showed you earlier, that is the function or the equation that matters for us the most. Okay. So, what do we do when we talk about income elasticity of demand? Well, ladies and gents, we show the following. It's just a relative relationship to the percentage of our income. Okay, and where is it? Income elasticity of demand can be positive, negative, or zero. Okay, and we're going to work through a couple of examples of that just now. You may need to understand that for the most part. But in a nutshell, ladies and gents, this is how it goes. As you earn more money, your capacity to spend more increases. Okay, everyone agrees on that. We haven't started the argument yet. But there's two effects. There's the effect that is called the income effect and the substitution effect. Who here over the course of the last year, 2 or 3, got some sort of an increase, some sort of adjustment in a living standard? Okay, no one. What good did you buy 2, 3, 4 years ago, or whenever it was that you don't buy today? 2-minute noodles. Okay, good old favorite. That's a perfect example. Okay, why don't you buy 2-minute noodles anymore? Surely you can afford more of them now, right? Okay, we hope. Well, no, inflation's crazy, man. Hey. Because what else can you do when your income increases? Ooh, I call it high-nose syndrome. I don't like chuck steak anymore. Porterhouse, cheers. Come at me, rum. Okay. High-nose syndrome. What this says is that when your income goes up, or the price of the good goes down in real terms, throw away this inflation bullshit. You can buy more of that. Okay. However, what also happens is that when the price of a good goes down, relative to the price of a good that stays the same, you can now on a relative basis afford more of the cheaper good. And it's how these two play out that you need to worry, that you need to focus on. And 2-minute noodles is what we call an inferior good. Not because of the quality of it. Man, they can put the best whatever they put into there. Okay. But it's when your living standard changes that these goods change as well. Inferior goods speak to nothing about the quality of the good. Normal goods speak to nothing about the quality of the good. It's just what changes as your income goes up or down. The high-nose syndrome. Okay. Then we move on to the next one called cross-price elasticity of demand. Cross-price elasticity of demand says the following. Okay, and I just want you to notice that you'll see the Y now appears. Complement or substitute. This is tricky. I cannot tell you how many times, and still to this bloody day, I get this thing wrong. When I try to do it on the fly, it doesn't matter. It's fine. I admit it. I get lots of things wrong. Everyone will. The way that helps me think about this is that when two goods are consumed together, in my mind, I combine their price, and then if there's a positive or a negative, I know, okay, if they consume together and the price goes up, I'm going to buy less of both of them. Okay, that's how it goes. Okay, that's a complement. But if there's another good that I can swap it for, let's call it fillet versus rum. Okay, and if there's no meat eaters, I apologize. Let's call it sprouts versus snap peas. Okay. Both are good in a salad, by the way. I just had to, 2 cents. What happens is, as the price of one goes down, chances are that you're going to buy less of the other good. So the sign's not going to exactly be as tricky as you think it would be. As easy as you think it would. It's going to trick you. So just try to get that in your mind. Okay. Very tricky little thing. Probably one question there, but okay, cool. But we go back to basics and we just understand the following. Step number 1. Okay. Understand what elasticity they're asking for from you. Okay? Step number 2. Solve for QD, ceteris paribus. Step 3. Find coefficient plus use with price to quantity ratio. And then you've got nothing that can be thrown at you that you won't be able to answer. And as I've highlighted over here, what I want you to see is that the quantity demanded stays exactly the same no matter what elasticity we're referring to. What does change? That coefficient needs to match that price. What does change? That coefficient needs to match that income. Finally, what does change? That coefficient needs to match that cross-price product, whether it be a complement or a substitute. Okay, so it doesn't matter. Okay, don't worry about this and that, just know inverse demand curve, follow those steps. I hope that you'd be able to get the correct answer. Okay. That's fine. Substitution and income effects, ladies and gents. I think there's nothing more boring in the world than when you simply get what you can read yourself read back to you. I'm not going to do that, partly because I'm just lazy. I should have paused that. But anyways, you can do it. I want to try and give you context so that you can make a little note, a little crib note, a little asterisk next to this. When you want to go and review this, you get it sorted. Okay. Normal and inferior goods we talked about as well. Okay. But what I want you to notice is the following. Let me find this for you. Okay. Here. This is the important thing. Please make sure you learn this. The substitution effect will always be in the direction of the change. It's always reinforcing. The substitution effect is reinforcing. If the price of a good goes up, another good relative to it is relatively cheaper, so what do? You buy less of that particular good. That substitution effect keeps everything on keel. It's this income effect that, depending on the type of a good, can go one way or another. And what are you going to focus on? You're going to focus on the key context there is whether it's normal or an inferior good. Okay, if it's normal, then there's this reinforcement effect that comes through in this elasticity. But if it's an inferior, the relative inferior good will outweigh the substitution effect and something negative happens, such as I get more income and essentially I'm going to buy less of this good or service. Now, please excuse me, I must apologize. There are two things that aren't in your notes and you'll get, boom, hit with a question when you see it. That is a Giffen good and a Veblen good. Giffen and Veblen. These are two little crazy scenarios as well. When prices of things change, that things don't behave the way they expected would. Okay. What happens if the price of a super yacht goes up? Doesn't matter. Suddenly some rich Russian oligarch sees his mate or her mate buy one, and they're like, oh, screw this, I'm going to buy one as well. Okay. There's weird things when it comes to exclusivity or the bandwagon effect. Okay. That when the price of a good goes up, people actually buy more of it. Hold on. Snob effect. Yes. Confess. Who's got iPhones? Woo, I wouldn't raise your hands too high, hey? Snob effect. Okay. Please don't benchmark to me. I've got like a 20-year-old Samsung, and I've been trying to buy a second-hand phone for the longest time. So if you've got an Android phone you want to sell second-hand, I'm your guy. Okay. So snob effect is exactly what that means. I think you'd understand it. Okay. Cognizant of time. A good speech or a good lecture is one that starts on time and ends on time, and I very much am a man of food as well, so we'll give you a decent break for that. If you ever tell Russ how long I give you for a break, I won't be around, so let's keep it our secret. Okay. We're going to talk about this little concept called marginal returns and marginal productivity before we do that, though. Okay. The first thing everybody doesn't understand about marginal stuff, and intern in our company as well, we're talking changes the margin, this and that. And eventually one day with like deer in the headlight kind of eyes said, what does this margin mean? What are you talking about here? Like, is it gross profit margin? No. Basically what it means is if you've got two variables, okay, and one of them is fixed and you move the other one around, how much difference is that change or that movement? Think about a stock market index. Let's say our Aussie index is 52,000 points. Who knows where it is, where it's going to be? But anyways, who here keeps a keen eye on the market? Okay. Yeah, well, what's going on in the world? What did you do to the bond market, man? Okay, we're going to speak afterwards. But let's take the example. You watch the Aussie index, maybe, do you? You don't. Okay. What do you watch then? Do you trade something wild? On Tesla. Okay. It's wild. Okay, we're not going to talk about wild rides, but let's stop here. Tangent. Let's say the Aussie index is at 52,000 points. And I say, holy crap, there's been a big change at the margin. The change at the margin doesn't refer to the level of 52,000 points. It refers to the 1,000 points above or below where the 52,000 is. So the 1,000 is the marginal change. Okay. Let's jump into this, giving you that context, and I think you'll understand it a bit better. We apply this mainly to real goods, though. Okay, so marginal returns. There is an economic phenomenon known as increasing marginal returns. What this means is that as you add one extra thing, the benefit that you get for adding it increases in a disproportionately larger and larger manner as you constantly add. Okay, but there is a tipping point. We'll get to it now. Think of a small business, a little startup company. You give this company $1 million. In return, they make 4 million rands worth of sales. You give this company another $2 million. In return, they make 8 million rands worth of sales. Okay. At the margin, for every incremental increase, you can see that it increases a bit more and a bit more. Okay. So for the first million, 4 million sales. For the next 1 million, another 8 million on top of that. That's what we're referring to here. The important thing, ladies and gents, is that we have at least one fixed input. That can't be emphasized enough over here. It's generally not talked about. Okay. Now, basically what this means is that you keep doing it, and there's various reasons that you get this increasing return or benefit here. And for the time being, we're going to stick to two factors of production. We'll talk about them in the next section. But we've got capital, how much money you can borrow, and we've got labor. For simplicity, we stop there. What we say is that at any point in time, your capital, which is the money that you have in the machinery or the stock that you have, is the fixed part. And what you need to do more to get the wheels turning is to sweat your labor a bit more. The first thing that any person in a business should do is to do what's called division of labor. That's where you split tasks up within your company to each individual that specializes on it. Such as our business in asset management, you've got somebody that does relationships, somebody that does the technology or infrastructure. Jeez, if you call your head of innovation your IT manager, it's one way to piss somebody off. So take a dig at work tomorrow. Then you've got your asset managers, you've got your business owners, and everybody kind of runs around and does these things separately and innovates a bit more. Why? Because of your startup or your setup costs or your learning curve or whatever it is. Imagine trying to teach your head of innovation, your IT person, your infrastructure support person, how to run a regression for you. That first regression is going to take a very long time. You can't just teach them the steps, you've got to teach them the principles, the interpretations, and you've got to repeat it. There's a learning curve, but if somebody does that the whole time, it goes out. But this isn't a free ride that can continue on forever and ever and ever, and this is where the law of diminishing marginal return comes in, and do they differ? Ever so slightly. On the next page. Okay, so what I did was I double checked with Russ that these were the notes that that are the correct notes. But I've got like a bad habit of changing things around as I work through it, so I'm sorry. But this is on the next page, eh? Is it there? Okay. I apologize, that's my fault, so if you can't find something, just say, oh, okay. Can you see this on the next page? Productivity, the relationship between... Okay, cool. I was going to say we're on the same page, but... Okay. All right. Okay. Has anybody ever heard the saying, too many chefs spoil the broth, or however it goes? Okay. Our team in our Joburg office here has got what we call the fishbowl or the sweat box, depending on how hot the day is or who's around. And there's a very limited small amount of space because apparently we're scalable and we don't need much space and it's all bullshit. But anyways, so we're sitting in there and there's 5 of us in this little room. Okay. And now we decide, yes, we need to hire another extra person right now. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to need to put them in this little fishbowl, right? What's going to happen? People are going to be sitting on top of each other like this. Our screens are like this big next to each other. There's going to be one overlapping. What happened to the benefit of getting an extra person? It all diminished. The law of the marginal diminishing returns kicked in because what's the fixed input? Our capital is the size of the space that we sublet, essentially. Okay. So as long as you understand this concept, then you're good to go. As a variable factor of production is added to a fixed input, eventually at a point in time there's going to be a diminishing marginal return. Okay. Think of a farmer who's involved with agriculture somehow. Yeah. Okay. I've got some buddies, they're also in CFA, so you'll see them around, try and find them. They're involved with big agricultural projects. And what happens is they go find pieces of land, and essentially the first portion of the land is the most fertile, gives the most benefit. However, there's that piece of land down there with a rocky outcrop, or with trees, or where the soil isn't so fertile. So you need to spend more and more money and machinery adding to it to get a diminishing marginal return. Okay, the more important part now that we've talked about this is if we understand it in graphs. So, let's get to it. We've got this little function down here, the total cost function. Total cost function says in our little simple world that we've essentially got labor and capital. We've got the proportion relative applied to labor and the proportion relative applied to capital in terms of what it costs. W is going to be wage and R is going to be interest rate. Okay. Don't ask me why in some instances equity refers to cost of equity as KE and economists do it differently and it's R. Just don't worry about that. But basically, what we start with saying is that there's a couple of variables that go into our total cost function. What is your aim? Your aim is to say that I want my total cost as low as possible, right? People think doing things is complicated, but if you get your revenue high and your cost low, you're doing something right, eh? Yeah, armchair economists can tell the world how it should be run. But anyways, what we're saying over here is that what we want to see is that if we can somehow keep one of these the same, but we vary the other one, we need to consider it relative to the level of production. Probus will mention this to you many, many, many times over, that your top line, your revenue line, is a function of both price and quantity. So is your cost per unit of good. Not only do you need to pay for the price of the factor of production, labor, but if that price of factor of production is spread over more units of goods, is the good or the CPI that's going on to your client more or less? Yes. An increased price over marginally proportion more goods, it's not as bad as it thinks, as you think. So, next time your boss comes to you and says, sheesh, you guys are asking for a 10% wage increase, it's impossible. You say, it's not 10%, we can pass on 6 to the client. We'll work that little bit harder, as we do every day, because we're superstar employees. Okay. So basically that's what this says, is that the price of inputs can fall for a total cost function to get it down, or your productivity themselves could increase. Okay, I know this is blaringly simple right now, but we're going to move to some graphs in a moment where it's going to make more sense. Okay. So the principles that you need to know, and we'll circle around to this in the next section, is that the benefits of productivity are lower business costs, increase in the market value of equity, and an increase in worker rewards. Why this matters? Not so much for this section, but we're going to talk about different sections next where we talk about where the best place to price a good is. Okay. So, we need to pick up the pace a bit. I'm going to speed it up. Stop me if you want me to. Stay somewhere. So we're going to talk about total, average, and marginal product of labor. Why are we talking about this? Well, we've just kept capital constant. We're simplifying it. Okay. So what does this mean? Ladies and gents, I'm going to assume that the total cost you can work out. Price, cost times quantity. Okay, I'm going to assume that the average you can work out. Okay. Marginal cost you should be able to as well. Let's just talk about that for 1 second. I want you to see how the marginal change drives everything else, because that's where the magic happens. Let's interpret this quickly. What you have is you have a fixed piece of land. You're a farmer, you're a vertical producer, you're a grocery store, it doesn't matter. Okay, you've got this fixed input. In the beginning, diddly squat happens because you just own this thing and there's nobody to do anything on it. Okay. However, in the first step, you say, I need to hire somebody. I'm going to hire somebody, and as a result of hiring them, this person is going to be able to assist me with 10 units of output. What's that output? Who cares? Doesn't matter. But you went from your total product to output to 10. So what's your change at the margin? From 0 to 10, okay? Total product minus previous total product on a cumulative basis, 10. So, there we go. Now, the total product provided by one person is 10 divided by 1, so that's your average. The marginal change is 10 minus 0, so that's your marginal change. Cool. Is your average total product going up or down? It's going up. Okay. Watch where marginal change goes relative to the average change. Let's move on to the next one. You decide that things are going well, you're going to employ a second person in your operation. By employing that second person, your total output goes from 10 to 22. Okay. What's your total now? The 22. What's your change at the margin? 22 minus 10 equals 12 units. What's happening to your average? 22 divided by 2 equals 11. I want you to notice the following clearly, that when your marginal product is improving, so is your average. If we go all the way down to the very last row on marginal product, the minus 2, how on earth did we get that? By going from the 9th to the 10th employee. Your total output went from 76 to 74, your marginal product went negative. It is only at this point that your average then starts to decrease. Okay, does that make sense? But the curve starts turning at a rate of change over here, from the 15 to the 18. So you don't wait for your marginal change to go negative before your average change starts to turn. Still positive, the rate of return has just gone slower. Okay. Okay, so there we go, we worked through it. We will see this again in more detail in graphs, so don't worry, you're not missing anything. Let's talk about break-even and shutdown points. What type of costs are there in a business? The management accountants in the room. Say? Fixed and variable. Okay. It's fixed and variable. I don't know the rest of management accounting, so we'll stop there. You have fixed costs that don't move with any amount that you produce. More or less you pay it. That's right. Happy with that. You've got your variable costs, they increase essentially proportionately for the most part relative to the quantity that you produce. Okay. Now, you need to add this fixed cost plus the variable cost to get a total cost, right? If your total revenue function is equal to your total cost function, you're probably at a break-even point. You happy with that? Okay. Now, I want to talk more so about the shutdown. You will probably get a question thrown at you about when is it worthwhile for a firm to shut down production. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to separate average variable cost and fixed cost from each other. You are going to sell a good for a particular price, right? Okay. What happens if the good that you're selling you sell for $10, but your average fixed cost is $5? What do you think you're going to do? You're going to continue producing because from what you sell it relative to what the fixed cost is, now you've got 5 rand left to kind of throw somewhere towards costs, right? Okay. What happens if now the remaining variable cost is 4 Rand? Selling price minus fixed equals $5. You've got a variable cost remaining, that's $4. Are you good to go? You're good to go, you're making a profit. Okay, we'll talk about that word profit in a second. What happens if your variable cost increases to $6 and you sell the product then for now $5? Shut down depending on whether it's permanent or temporary. Okay, if it's permanent, you shut down forever. If it's temporary, you shut down for a period of time. Now, what I want to do is I want to flip this on its head. We're selling our good over here for $10. Same scenario. We've got our variable cost, which is $6. That leaves us with $4. Exactly the opposite. Okay. But our average fixed cost per good is 5 Rand. We've got 4 Rand left in the kitty, and our average fixed cost is $5. What do we do? Okay? The fixed cost per unit does go down as you produce more, but bear in mind, your question is going to give you a static snapshot at a point in time and say, where on this curve is the break-even on the shutdown point? Now, ladies and gents, if the decrease in price happens such that you can't fully cover your fixed cost, what you're going to do is you're still going to produce in the short term. Why? Because I can cover 80% of my fixed costs. If I shut down production and stop selling, I've got to pay 100% of my fixed costs for the next 3-6 months with no production. Okay, it's only such a time where your selling price essentially drops below your average variable cost, so that by selling the next unit of good, you're actually increasing the whole deeper and deeper past your fixed cost. Okay, so that's how I need you to be able to determine this. But before we go on, I just want to talk about this profit thing that I mentioned. Everybody in this room has had a look at accounting. Everybody in this room should be able to navigate their way through an income statement. Unless you work with IFRS 9 and then nobody knows what the hell's going on. Okay, but what happens is at the bottom of this income statement, you've got this number that kind of says net profit, right? Okay, but Kobus has probably taught you somewhere, somehow, that there may be a flaw in the system. The flaw in the system is, what do we do when we work out WACC, weighted average cost of capital? Cost of debt and cost of equity, right? That's where economists come in. Once again, you see, everybody takes all the good shit from here, puts it in theirs and says economics is nonsense. No ways. Okay. What you need to know is that accounting is explicit. It doesn't consider opportunity costs, i.e., if you're renting out a factory that is paying 10 grand a month in rent, but you could rent it out for 15, that's a cost. It's an opportunity cost, minus 5,000. If you look at an income statement, what you're going to look at is EVA or MVA. You should see those terms eventually, or you already have. That's where you explicitly consider the cost of equity in an income statement, technically. When we say that you break even as an economist, we are saying not that you only cover your costs, but you cover your costs and the cost of equity on top of that. Okay, so breaking even doesn't mean zero profit. It means an appropriate profit relative for the cost of equity. And that number is in the shutdown point to the break-even point. Okay. Don't let it confuse you where you see that there's no profit. Okay. Marginal revenue, ladies and gents, the change at the margin is exactly the same. Don't worry about this. We'll get to a function just now where there's a little bit of concern. We've talked about marginal costs. And I want to talk about the following. There is this little thing that says that profit is maximized where marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. Okay. Now, ladies and gents, I'm jumping the gun slightly, and after this we'll take a break. But over here, I'm going to draw some lines for you, and you're just going to have to trust me. We've got a marginal revenue line that's perfectly flat. Whoop. We've got a marginal revenue line that's perfectly flat. That means by selling one extra unit, we make exactly the same revenue as we did at the margin for the last extra unit and the last extra unit. What this implies is that every single unit is exactly the same price. There's only one market where we can do this. This is called the perfectly competitive market. Okay, so if I sell every single unit for 20 bucks, then my total revenue function is just linear. 1 unit times 20 equals 20. 2 units times 20 equals 40. Repeat the exercise, I won't bore you. However, marginal cost will look like this. You're a business owner, taking an ecos course, an accounting course, you're a charter holder, whatever it is. You know that as a small firm, you can get some sort of benefit given to you by employing just a little bit more people, right? For the same rent, for the same IT cost, for the same computer expense, 2 people can bring in more business, and your cost of everything decreases for each product. Okay? That's why this marginal cost curve comes down. Eventually, there's a point where it starts going up. Why? You're adding more people, more resources to a fixed input, and there's a problem that happens. What I need you to do is you just need to trust me that profit is maximized at that point or at that point. Now, which point of output do you think you're going to probably try and produce at? Is it going to be point 1 or is it going to be point 2? It's going to be at point 1. Point 1, why would it be there? Okay, very good. South Africa, we've got a labor market that suits the employee. You can't fire somebody as easily. That's basically the only reason I've kept my job for so long. Employees just stick around, right? However, I said to you earlier, the marginal change drives what? The average, right? Right? Watch this. If I've been selling something where my costs are greater than the amount of money I make on every single unit of good, by selling good 1 for 20 bucks, it cost me 40 bucks to make. I'm 20 bucks in the red. By selling good 2 for 20 bucks and it cost me 30 bucks to make. Okay, I'm cumulatively still 30 in the red now. Okay, and yes, the amount of time that I'm in red negative territory, I'm making a loss in total. At the margin, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But I've got to sell enough goods at a profit to make up my previous losses as well. Does that make sense? No? Yes? No? Okay, if it doesn't make sense, let's break for food and just trust me on this. But there's a second order condition. Why second order? I don't know. But anyways, you've got to produce at this little magical point over here. Profit is maximized where MR equals MC, and where you're on the rising portion of the MC curve. Think about your break-even point in totality. You may only break even with total revenue and total cost at this arbitrary point 3. Then you'd be certifiably insane to go backwards from that point in time. Chances are you'd move along forward. So I hope that helps you sort it out. But anyways, ladies and gents, we've done a good job so far. Let's take a break. I would very much like to get going again by 8 o'clock at the latest. I know food takes long. But if everyone's back here before that, let's hit it from then. Enjoy your break.